Second episode opens with two very different visions of survival. Maggie and Renata devote themselves to strengthening their hidden community, organizing supplies and preparing for the future, while Negan spends his days drinking and escaping into old video games at the Walker Bar. Their contrasting approaches reflect the uneasy balance holding the settlement together. During a small gathering, Maggie meets Pearlie Armstrong before his planned departure for New Babylon. She gives him the final bag of French roast coffee from Bruegel's treasured stash as a farewell gift. Pearlie thanks her and promises to keep the community's location secret. Although Maggie wants to believe him, she admits she can't fully trust anyone anymore. Their conversation is interrupted when Renata spots a warning signal outside, forcing everyone away from the windows. At the same time, Negan notices the alert from the bar and recognizes it as another sign that Maggie and Renata are dealing with visitors from New Babylon. Soon after, Maggie and Pearlie monitor the city from a rooftop using a listening device. They overhear Linus and Reese discussing a food search for the Dhamma. Maggie immediately contacts Negan, reminding him of their agreement to hunt the woman responsible for so much suffering. Negan accepts without hesitation, and the trio follows the trail back to Broadway. Rather than attacking, Maggie approaches Linus and Reese peacefully, offering them food and a chance to return to New Babylon with Pearlie. The offer sounds genuine, but the young men remain suspicious. Maggie finally admits the real reason they're there. They want to know where the Dhamma is hiding. The Dhamma suddenly reveals herself, calmly claiming she rescued the two young men not only physically, but mentally. She taunts Maggie by bringing up Herschel, insisting that although Maggie managed to pull her son away, she can never stop people from chasing hope and purpose. Moments later, armed followers emerge from the shadows and surround Maggie's group with knives. Maggie desperately tries to avoid bloodshed, warning everyone to stand down, but the attackers rush forward anyway. Forced to defend themselves, Maggie, Pearlie, and Negan open fire, cutting through the ambush in seconds. When the shooting stops, Linus is the only survivor. Maggie spares him and tells him to run. The Dhamma escapes into the theater, triggering a deadly trap by releasing a massive chandelier. Negan reacts instantly, shoving Maggie and Pearlie out of its path just before it crashes to the floor. The chase resumes through the abandoned building, but ends abruptly when the Dhamma runs into a walker blocking the exit. Maggie kills the walker and saves the woman she has been hunting. Instead of showing gratitude, the Dhamma criticizes Maggie for selfishly taking Herschel away from the future she imagined for him. Negan sees an opportunity to end everything and raises his gun, but Maggie unexpectedly stops him. Despite everything the Dhamma has done, Maggie refuses to execute her on the spot. Back at the settlement, the Dhamma is locked inside a secure cage beside the methane tanks. She immediately asks what happened to the Croat, and Maggie coldly informs her that he's dead. Rather than accepting defeat, the Dhamma begins tempting Maggie with promises of knowledge and power. She argues that countless survivors are waiting to be united into something far greater than a single safe haven. Maggie rejects the idea, refusing to become another leader who rules through violence, but the Dhamma's words plant an uncomfortable question about the future. Meanwhile, Louise treats the injury Negan suffered while protecting Maggie from the collapsing chandelier. Herschel helps stitch the wound and finally voices the fear he's been carrying. Negan has saved his life more than once, yet he still struggles to trust the man who once terrorized so many people. Negan tries to make light of the situation, joking about spending his days playing video games, while Maggie quietly watches the conversation unfold. Later, Maggie tells Herschel they captured the Dhamma alive. Herschel admits he probably would have killed her if given the chance, but what truly frightens him is not killing. It is wondering whether he'll be capable of doing it when the time finally comes. Looking to his mother for guidance, he asks if she can teach him how to take another person's life when necessary, leaving Maggie with an impossible lesson to consider. The Dhamma's imprisonment quickly becomes a major source of conflict within the community. Maggie and Renata debate whether keeping such a dangerous prisoner alive is worth the food and resources she consumes. Killing her would remove a serious threat, but it would also betray the principles their settlement was built upon. Listening nearby, Negan dismisses the argument entirely. In his view, allowing a ruthless murderer to live is a luxury that will eventually cost innocent lives. Renata fires back by reminding him of his own violent past, asking whether that means he deserves execution too. Negan argues that survival often demands brutal choices, warning Maggie that Renata's compassion could one day get everyone killed. Before the discussion can continue, Luis reports that the Dhamma has refused to eat. Already weakened by starvation, she may not survive much longer. Maggie decides to offer her one final choice instead of forcing the issue. Elsewhere, Negan accompanies Dillard through the ruined streets, where the eccentric former detective insists he can understand the sounds walkers make. Curious but skeptical, Negan watches as Dillard attempts to communicate with one trapped inside a collapsed scaffold. Before long, the unstable structure gives way, smashing a nearby window and attracting walkers from every direction. The two barely escape by climbing the remaining scaffolding, while Negan, desperately, throws bricks to slow the advancing horde. As they wait for the walkers below to lose interest, Negan explains that these aren't the harmless walkers from the bar. They're relentless killers. Dillard humorously apologizes to them in their own strange language, showing just how deeply his unusual behavior has become part of him. Later, Dillard reveals he once worked undercover as a detective, spending years pretending to be someone else. Eventually, the role stopped feeling like an act and became part of who he was. His confession helps explain why he now relates to walkers in such an unsettling way. Back at the prison cell, Maggie brings the Dhamma another meal, but this time she also leaves a knife beside it. She calmly tells her captive that there are only two paths left: share what she knows and try to become something better, or use the knife to end her own life. The decision now belongs entirely to the Dhamma. Meanwhile, Dillard returns to the Walker bar and asks Negan to teach him the arcade game he always plays. As the two exchange insults while competing, Maggie arrives and asks Negan for a private conversation. She finally admits the truth. She doesn't want the Dhamma to have any choice at all. She wanted to kill her in the theater and still feels the same. Negan understands because he's the only person who truly knows what carrying that kind of hatred feels like. He simply tells her to kill the Dhamma. Maggie hesitates because the community they have built represents something better than endless revenge. She reminds Negan that he himself is proof people can change. Negan disagrees. He argues that every society eventually survives by killing those who threaten it. But sooner or later, people make mistakes. Once that happens, justice becomes revenge, and the cycle never ends. Maggie believes he could help build a better future instead of hiding in the bar, but Negan refuses. After everything he's done, he no longer believes redemption is possible. Hurt by his hopelessness, Maggie walks away, convinced the man who once showed signs of changing has given up on himself. Alone outside, Negan notices dozens of mice feeding on the remains of a walker. The disturbing sight reminds him that even death continues feeding new life in this broken world. Not long afterward, Negan seeks Maggie out to continue their conversation. He admits he isn't emotionally dead, but he still refuses to live inside the community because he doesn't believe a small settlement can survive forever. Drawing on his experience leading the Saviors, he argues that rebuilding civilization requires more than survivors. It needs laws, judges, wardens, and enough people to enforce them. Maggie begins to see the possibility of something larger than simply protecting one hidden sanctuary. If they have enough food, perhaps they can welcome others and rebuild a functioning society. Negan remains doubtful, insisting that finding genuinely good people may be impossible. Maggie counters that people can change, while those who refuse can be dealt with under a real system of justice. Though unconvinced, Negan leaves her to pursue the idea. Inspired by the conversation, Maggie presents her expansion plan to Renata. The proposal worries her friend, who fears inviting strangers will destroy everything they've worked to protect. Maggie argues that remaining isolated is even more dangerous. Their food supplies are shrinking, winter is approaching, and they lack enough workers, doctors, and long-term security. Expanding now gives them the chance to farm Central Park, strengthen their defenses, and create a future instead of merely surviving another season. Eventually, Renata begins to understand Maggie's reasoning. Their decision is tested almost immediately when the warning light signals another arrival. Outside, they find Linus wandering alone. Instead of turning him away, Maggie asks what kind of people they truly want to become. Together, she and Renata choose compassion and welcome him into the community. Before Pearlie departs for New Babylon, Maggie catches him at the docks and changes her mind about secrecy. She gives him permission to tell others about the settlement and even invites him and his family to return one day. Although Pearlie insists his duty still lies with New Babylon, he promises to spread the word responsibly and hints that, if he succeeds in changing things back home, he and Maggie will have much more to discuss. Back in her cell, the starving Dhamma finally begins eating just as Negan arrives. Pretending to be disappointed that she survived, he unlocks the cage and dares her to attack him. She immediately lunges with the knife Maggie left behind, but Negan easily disarms her and turns the weapon against her. Elsewhere, Maggie and Renata restore power across the island, filling the skyline with lights for the first time in years. When Maggie returns, she discovers the Dhamma has become a walker, bringing the long conflict to a brutal end. However, the celebration is short-lived. Far away, groups of survivors notice the glowing lights on the horizon and begin making their way toward the island, setting the stage for a future that will test Maggie's dream of rebuilding civilization.